The day my oldest friend walked through my front door and burst into tears, I finally understood how far I had fallen. Her name was Paulette. We had been friends since grade 7, back in Sudbury, Ontario, when we sat next to each other in French class and passed notes about boys we would never talk to. She had moved out to Victoria years ago, and between her hip replacement and my so-called busy life, we'd not seen each other in almost 2 years. When she called to say she was coming through Toronto and wanted to stay a few days, I felt something I had almost forgotten, a small, quiet spark of happiness. But when I opened the door and she saw me standing there, she did not hug me. She just stared, and then her eyes filled up, and she put her hand over her mouth. "Marilyn," she whispered, "what happened to you?" I did not know what she meant. Not really. I had stopped looking at myself honestly in the mirror months ago. I had stopped noticing the way my clothes hung off me, the way I moved slowly now, the way I had learned to ignore the hollow feeling in my stomach that had become so ordinary. I thought of it as just getting older. I was 68 years old. I had a government pension of just over $7,200 a month. My house in Etobicoke was paid off. My late husband, Gerald, and I still cannot write his name without feeling the weight of it, had left me comfortable. More than comfortable. We had been careful people, Gerald and I, 41 years of careful. And I was standing in my own home in January with the heat turned down to 16 degrees, wearing 2 sweaters, having eaten half a can of soup for lunch because I was trying to make things last. Paulette came inside. She looked around the living room without saying a word. The big sectional sofa Gerald and I had bought together when we moved into this house was gone. The side tables were gone. The framed prints we had brought back from our trip to PEI were gone. The room had a single armchair, the old one from the basement, and a small television on a folding table. She turned to me. "Where is everything?" I opened my mouth to explain, to say what I always said, that my daughter had suggested we simplify, that the furniture had been old anyway, that it made the room feel bigger. I had rehearsed these explanations so many times that they came to me automatically, the way you recite something you no longer believe, but have said so often, it feels almost true. But Paulette had known me since I was 12 years old. She looked at me the way only someone who has known you that long can look at you, past the rehearsed words, past the polite face, and she said quietly, "Marilyn, tell me the truth." And I sat down in that cold armchair and I told her everything. My daughter Renata had always been the capable one. That was what everyone said about her, and what I believed. She was organized where I was scattered, decisive where I was uncertain. When Gerald got sick, pancreatic cancer, 14 months from diagnosis to the end, it was Renata who managed the appointments and the medications and the paperwork. She sat with the palliative care team and asked the right questions. She made the arrangements when the time came. I could not have done any of it without her. Grief does something to your judgment. I think that is important to say, not as an excuse. I have given up looking for excuses, but because it is true. When Gerald died, the person I had navigated every large decision with for 41 years was simply gone. And in that emptiness, Renata stepped in. Her husband, Cam, had been laid off about 8 months after Gerald's funeral. He had worked in logistics, something to do with supply chain management, and his company had restructured and his position had been eliminated. Renata told me this on the phone, and I could hear the strain in her voice. And before she even asked, I heard myself saying, "Why don't you two come stay here for a while, until things settle?" They arrived in March with 2 carloads of boxes and a dog I had not known they had. A large, restless German shepherd named something I can no longer remember. The dog chewed through the baseboard in the hallway the first week. Cam said he would fix it. He never did. At first, it was fine. Renata cooked sometimes. The house felt less quiet. I told myself this was what families did, and maybe I even believed it. The first thing that should have stopped me was the conversation about the checking account. Renata came to me about 6 weeks after they moved in with a yellow notepad covered in columns of numbers. She sat at the kitchen table and walked me through it all very professionally, the way she used to present things at her office job. Property taxes, utilities, groceries, car insurance, She had calculated exactly how much the household cost to run each month, and then she said in her calm, reasonable voice, "Mom, it would be so much easier if we just had access to the account directly, so we can handle things as they come up. You shouldn't have to worry about all of this." I thought about Gerald, how he used to sit at that same table with the bills spread out, how he always insisted on opening everything himself, reviewing everything himself. He used to say, only half joking, "The day I stop paying attention to where the money goes is the day someone helps themselves to it." But Gerald was not there, and Renata was, with her notepad and her reasonable voice, and I was so tired of worrying, grief and loneliness, and the particular exhaustion of living alone after 41 years of not doing so. All of it had worn me down to something that did not trust its own instincts anymore. I gave her the card. I wrote down the pin on a piece of paper and I handed it to her. I told myself it was temporary. I want to explain something because I know what people think when they hear a story like this. They think, how could you be so foolish? How could an educated woman, a retired nurse, a woman who spent 30 years in healthcare and knew what exploitation looked like, hand over her finances and not notice what was happening? I have asked myself that question so many times in the middle of the night that it has worn a groove in my brain. What I can tell you is that it did not happen all at once. It happened the way ice forms on a river, so gradually that you cannot point to the moment when the water stopped moving. One small thing, and then another, until the day you look around and realize you have been frozen for months and you did not even feel it happening. The groceries were managed by Renata now, so I no longer saw receipts. The utilities were managed by Renata. The internet, the phone, all of it was now going through their account, she said, to simplify things. She would transfer the relevant amounts from my account, she said. It was just easier this way, she said. When I asked to see the bank statements, she brought me a printed summary, just the totals, and said the detailed statements were confusing, and she had organized everything into a spreadsheet I did not need to look at. "You trust me, don't you, Mum?" she said. And because she was my daughter, because she was my blood, because I had nursed her through chickenpox and driven her to piano lessons and sat in the front row at her university convocation, I said yes. By summer, the furniture had started disappearing. The sectional sofa went first. Renata said it was showing its age, and Cam had found someone on Facebook Marketplace who would take it. I thought she meant she was replacing it. She was not replacing it. Her week passed. 2 weeks. I asked about a new sofa, and she said they were looking, but everything decent was expensive, and we should wait for a sale. We were still waiting when autumn came. The dining room table went next. Gerald's mother's china cabinet, the extra bedroom set. Each time, the explanation was the same. Too old, too large. Taking up space, they were looking for something better. Each time, nothing came to replace it. I did not know then what they were doing with the money. I found out later from Paulette, who had a sharp mind and no patience for soft peddling, that Cam had significant personal debts from before the layoff, credit cards, a personal loan, and apparently a rather poorly considered investment in a friend's business that had gone nowhere. They were paying it all down with my money, not their money. By October, I was eating one real meal a day. I want to be precise about this because I think precision matters. I was not skipping meals because I wasn't hungry, or because I was dieting, or because of some personal choice. I was skipping meals because when I went to the kitchen and looked in the refrigerator, there was very little in it that I was welcome to. The groceries Renata bought were theirs. She had stopped including me in the grocery runs without ever saying so directly, without any conversation or announcement. It simply happened. The food in the fridge had names on it, essentially, though no one had written anything down. I understood, the way you understand things in your own home that you are no longer fully in charge of, that the groceries were not for me. I was living on tinned things from the back of the pantry, crackers, the occasional egg if there were some left over. I lost 14 pounds between September and December. My pharmacist, a kind young man named Jerome who had been filling my prescriptions for years, commented on it in November when I came in for my blood pressure medication. I said I had been watching what I ate. He looked at me with an expression I did not let myself interpret at the time. I had also, by November, missed 2 months of my blood pressure medication because I did not have spending money to cover the copay. My pension was going directly into the account Renata managed. I had access to a separate small account that Gerald had opened years ago for incidentals, maybe $200 in it at any given time, and I was afraid to ask Renata for cash in case she asked why. I should have asked. I should have asked. I should have done so many things. When Paulette called me in December to say she was coming, I was so relieved I cried on the phone. I told her I had just been emotional lately. That was what I said. She sat across from me in that cold living room for a long time after I finished talking. She did not interrupt me. She did not say a single word until I had told her everything. And when I was done, she was quiet for a moment. And then she said, "Marilyn, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Paulette had retired from legal aid 3 years earlier. She had spent 25 years helping vulnerable people navigate the legal system, and she had what I can only describe as a radar for situations involving exploitation. She had seen versions of this before, not this exactly, but the shape of it. She took out her phone and called her former colleague, a woman named Sharon who still practiced in Toronto and specialized in elder law. It was a Saturday afternoon. Sharon picked up. Paulette explained the situation in about 4 minutes, clearly and without drama, the way lawyers do. Then she handed the phone to me, and Sharon asked me a series of very specific questions. Did I have written documentation of the original arrangement? Did I have copies of my bank statements? Did I have any emails or texts from Renata about the financial arrangement? I had almost nothing, but Sharon said that was not necessarily a problem. That evening, while Renata and Cam were out, they went out most Saturday evenings, dinner and a movie or something, while I sat alone in a house that had been slowly emptied around me. Paulette helped me log into my online banking for the first time in over a year. I had forgotten I even still had the login. What we found took my breath away. In the 11 months since Renata had taken over the account, a little over $61,000 had been withdrawn or transferred out, in increments that were never quite large enough to trigger any kind of alert. Regular transfers to Cam's personal account, grocery and household charges that ran 3 to 4 times what 2 extra people should realistically cost, a charge from a jewelry store in Yorkdale I did not recognize, a weekend at a resort in Collingwood that I had not been invited to and had not known about, and 2 wire transfers, each just under $10,000, to an account I did not recognize. I sat there and read the numbers, and I felt something that was not quite anger and not quite grief. It was something colder than both. It was the specific feeling of understanding, finally and completely, what had been done to you. Paulette put her hand over mine. "We're going to fix this," she said. We printed everything we could, screenshots, statements going back as far as the portal would show. Paulette wrote notes in her careful legal aid handwriting. She called Sharon back, and they spoke for 40 minutes. By the time Renata and Cam came home that night, there was a plan. I did not confront Renata that night. Paulette advised against it, and I trusted her judgment more than my own. We needed a few things in place first. A new bank account in my name only, opened first thing Monday morning. Sharon's letter of representation. A call to the bank's fraud and elder abuse line, which, I learned, major Canadian banks maintain specifically for situations like mine. I had not known such a thing existed. Monday came. Paulette drove me to the TD branch on Bloor Street, where I had banked for 30 years. I explained the situation to the branch manager, a quiet, attentive woman who brought us into her office and closed the door. By the time we left, my pension deposits had been redirected to a new account that only I had access to. The old account had been flagged and a formal report filed. Sharon's letter went to Renata by email that afternoon. I was home when Renata read it. I know because I heard her on the phone in the kitchen, speaking in a low, tight voice. And then she came and stood in the doorway of the living room where I was sitting with Paulette, and her face was a particular shade of pale that I'd not seen since she was a teenager, and I'd caught her in a lie. She started to speak. She had an explanation ready. Of course she did. Renata always had an explanation ready. She said the money had gone to household expenses, to managing everything I couldn't manage myself, to covering things I didn't understand. She said I had agreed to this. She said Paulette was putting ideas in my head. Her voice was calm and loyally, and each sentence followed the last with the kind of orderly logic that had always made her seem so competent, so reasonable, so trustworthy. I let her finish. Then I said, "The resort in Collingwood, Renata, the jewellery from Yorkdale. Tell me about those." The calm broke. What came after was not pretty, and I will not pretend otherwise. There was crying, hers, not mine. I had run out of tears for this months ago. There was anger. There was Cam coming in from the other room with the particular defensive belligerence of someone who knows exactly what he has done and is choosing to brazen it through anyway. There were accusations directed at Paulette. There was a phone call to a lawyer, their lawyer, not Sharon, that Renata made, right there in front of me, as though legal pressure from their side was a move that would change what the bank records showed. It did not change what the bank records showed. They were out of my house within the week. I had a locksmith in on Thursday. Paulette stayed for 10 days total, sleeping in the empty bedroom on an air mattress we bought at Canadian Tire, making me eat actual meals, sitting with me in the evenings watching old programs on the small television. The legal process took several months, and I will not pretend it was simple or painless. Sharon was thorough and tireless. The bank's elder financial abuse protocol was already in motion independently of what Sharon was doing. In the end, Renata and Cam agreed to a full repayment arrangement. Everything that had been taken, with interest, structured as a legal debt. Whether I ever see all of it, I honestly cannot tell you. What I can tell you is that it is documented and it is real, and it is not something they can simply walk away from. I have not spoken to Renata since the day they left. I have thought about this more than almost anything. She is my daughter. I carried her. I loved her completely, and I love her still, in the complicated, grieving way you love someone who has hurt you, in a way you cannot fully recover from. But love is not the same as trust, and trust is not something I can manufacture where it no longer exists. What I want to tell you, and I am telling you this as a 68-year-old woman who spent 30 years as a nurse and should have known better and did not, is that it can happen to anyone, not to foolish people or careless people or people who don't love their children properly. It can happen to you if you are lonely enough and tired enough, and if the person doing it is someone you trusted completely and for very good reason. I want to tell you to protect yourself, not in a way that makes you suspicious of everyone you love, but in a practical, unglamorous, very Canadian way. Keep your own bank account. Keep your own access to your own money. If someone takes over your finances, even your child, even someone you trust with your life, keep one account that is only yours, that you check yourself regularly without asking permission. It is not a betrayal of trust. It is just sense. Tell a friend. Tell someone on the outside what is happening in your life. Paulette could not have known what was wrong with me if I had not let her in, and I almost didn't. I almost said I was fine, and let her visit pass the way all those months had passed, quietly, with my face arranged into something that passed for acceptable. After Paulette went back to Victoria, I called Jerome at the pharmacy. I thanked him for the look he had given me in November. He said he was glad I was okay. I went back to my doctor, got my blood pressure properly managed again, and started eating like a person who intended to keep living. In the spring, I bought a sofa, nothing extravagant, a nice solid piece from a furniture store on Queensway, the kind that Gerald would have approved of on price, and I would have approved of on comfort. I put it exactly where the old sectional used to be, in front of the window that looks out onto the backyard, where the lilac bush Gerald planted 20 years ago blooms every May without fail. Paulette came back in July. We sat on that sofa and drank tea and watched the backyard and talked for 3 hours without stopping, the way we used to talk when we were 12 years old, passing notes about boys we would never speak to. Some things I have learned you do not recover from, and some things, the ones that were always real, you cannot lose, even when someone tries to take everything else. I think about the lilac bush a lot. Gerald planted it the spring we moved in, and every May it blooms without being asked, without being tended much, without needing anything from anyone. It just does what it was made to do. I find that quietly remarkable now in a way I never did before. What happened to me did not happen because I was stupid. I want to say that plainly because I spent a long time believing it did. It happened because I was a mother who loved her daughter, and because grief had worn down the part of me that knew to ask questions. Those are human things. They are not shameful things, but they are things I wish I had understood sooner, because understanding them is what finally let me stop blaming myself and start being honest about what had actually gone wrong. Renata did not become that person overnight. I have thought about this more than I can say. She had always been capable, always been the one who managed things, and somewhere in that capability, without my noticing, and perhaps without her fully noticing either, the line between helping and controlling had dissolved. Cam's debts gave it direction and urgency, but the habit of taking more than she was entitled to, of treating my life as a resource rather than a life, that had been growing quietly for longer than the 11 months showed in the bank records. I think now that she had been making small decisions for years that moved her further from her own sense of right and wrong, one reasonable sounding justification at a time, until she arrived somewhere she could only stay by not looking at it directly. That is what happens when we let go of our moral compass incrementally. It is rarely one large choice. It is 100 small ones, each slightly worse than the last, each excused by the weight of the previous ones already made. What saved me was not cleverness on my part. It was Paulette, who had spent a career paying attention to people in trouble and had never stopped knowing how to read a room. Her intelligence in that moment, practical, legal, completely unsentimental, is what turned my situation from one that was continuing to deteriorate into one that could be stopped and documented and addressed. I had the information I needed to protect myself. I had simply stopped believing I was allowed to use it. Paulette reminded me that I was. And then there was the part that came after, the part where I had to decide to keep going, to eat properly, to call Jerome, to buy the sofa. These sound like small things, and they were small things, but they required something I had nearly lost entirely. The conviction that my own life was worth tending. That I was not simply waiting out the remaining years in whatever condition I happened to find myself in. That I had some say in the matter. I did not recover my relationship with my daughter. I do not know if I ever will. That is a grief I carry and expect to carry for the rest of my life, because love does not switch off just because trust is gone. But I did recover myself. I recovered the part of me that knows what I am owed, not in a grasping way, but in the quiet, reasonable way that Gerald always had about him. The part that reads the bank statement. The part that keeps one account that belongs to no one else. If you are sitting somewhere right now, in a house that feels less like yours than it used to, with a pension that seems to disappear before you can account for it, and a voice in your head that keeps explaining why that's probably fine, I want you to call your Paulette. Whoever your Paulette is, call her this week. The lilac bloomed again this May. I sat on my new sofa and watched it through the window and drank my tea, and I thought, yes, this is still mine.